Welcome the anointed ones. The most uncomfortable moment for a confident liar is not being exposed by an enemy. It's being corrected by the source they trust. Here's where this story gets awkward and a little funny. There is a documented psychological phenomenon where people cling harder to a false belief after it's been disproven by an authority they respect. Not because the evidence wasn't clear, but because admitting the truth would mean admitting they outsourced their thinking. Studies in behavioral psychology show that when credibility collapses from the inside, the brain often responds with mockery, denial, or laughter, not reflection. That reaction isn't intelligence, it's self-defense wearing a smile. And that's exactly what's happening here. They didn't lose because you argued better. They didn't lose because you explained yourself. They lost because every voice they swore by independently reached the same conclusion about you. And none of those voices asked for permission first. That's the part no one prepared them for. They were comfortable laughing when they thought your story was small. They were relaxed when they assumed your name would stay trapped in their private group chats and dismissive conversations. Confidence is easy when you believe you control the scoreboard. But the mood changed the moment those same reliable sources, the ones they quoted like scripture, started calling you legendary. Now here's the humor in it. They can't argue with you without arguing with their own references. They can't discredit you without discrediting the very people they used to feel smart. So they laugh. Not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, the kind that shows up when someone spills coffee on themselves in public and pretends it was intentional. The laugh that says, "I'm fine," while the internal panic is doing parkour. This isn't about admiration. This isn't about jealousy. This is about authority turning around, pointing in your direction, and accidentally exposing who was bluffing the whole time. Because when the sources laugh at them now, it's not mockery, it's correction, and correction hits harder than criticism ever could. Stay with me, because once you see how this unfolds, you'll understand why their laughter is loud, forced, and strangely rehearsed, and why none of it is actually aimed at you. Number 1. You were validated by systems that don't hand out praise casually. What people fail to understand is that not all approval carries the same weight. Some praise is emotional, some is political, some is just noise meant to keep relationships smooth. But the validation you received didn't come from people who hand out compliments to feel generous. It came from systems built to evaluate, filter, test, and reject far more than they ever approve. These are places where being nice, being visible, or being loud means nothing. You don't pass because someone likes you. You pass because you hold up under pressure. That's why this moment hit them so hard. They assumed those systems would confirm what they already believed about you. They trusted the process because they thought the process was on their side. They believed authority would echo their judgment, not contradict it. When those same structures looked at you and came back with respect, recognition, or even quiet admiration, it exposed a brutal truth. The issue was never your credibility. It was their perception. What makes this sting is that these systems don't move emotionally. They don't reward sympathy stories or punish personal dislike. They look at patterns, consistency, results, and substance over time. When they validated you, it wasn't dramatic. It was calm, matter-of-fact, almost boring in delivery, and that's what made it devastating. There was no debate, no argument, no room to spin the outcome. Now here's the uncomfortable part they don't want to say out loud. If those systems were right about you, then they were wrong about you for a long time. That means their confidence wasn't wisdom, it was assumption. And assumptions feel powerful until they collide with verification. This is why they laugh now, because admitting respect from serious evaluators would force them to admit they misjudged you without doing the work to truly know you. And that realization is expensive. It costs pride, it costs image, it costs the identity of being the one who sees clearly. So instead of owning the mistake, they downplay the source. They joke about the outcome. They act like the validation doesn't matter. But deep down, they know exactly what kind of approval this was. And they know it wasn't given lightly. Number 2, their confidence collapsed the moment authority stopped agreeing with them. There's a hidden truth about people who rely on authority for their sense of certainty. Their confidence isn't their own, it's borrowed. It exists only as long as the voices they trust continue to confirm their worldview. The second those voices change their tune, the foundation underneath them crumbles, and it's sudden, chaotic, and often humiliating. They're used to leaning on others for validation, measuring reality by consensus rather than by clarity or reason. When the authorities they trusted recognized you as legendary, something inside them broke, and that break didn't look quiet or graceful. It looked like panic disguised as mockery. This collapse isn't about intellect, it's about ego. Their identity was wrapped up in being right because the sources they trusted never failed them, until you came along. For them, certainty was a shield. When those shields dissolved, they were left exposed, raw, and scrambling for something to hold on to. Suddenly all the pride, all the certainty, all the assumptions about their judgment turned to dust. It's easy to laugh when things make sense, but it's a different kind of laugh when your own framework betrays you. That's the laugh they're producing now, laughter that's defensive, bitter, and almost theatrical because admitting the collapse would be unbearable. What's fascinating is how quickly people try to patch that collapse with stories and explanations that preserve their self-image. They replay old narratives, twist timelines, or emphasize tiny inconsistencies elsewhere to convince themselves they're still in control. Meanwhile, the authority that actually matters has already made its assessment. You don't need to argue, you don't need to prove, you don't need to chase approval, because their confidence isn't part of the picture anymore. And that's why the moment is so powerful. Your recognition didn't just elevate you, it exposed them. It forced them to confront the fragility of their certainty and the shallow construction of their pride. Their laughter isn't joy. It's the sound of someone watching the ground shift beneath their feet and pretending it's solid, even when they know it's not. Number 3. You exposed how much of their intelligence was outsourced. Most people like to believe they're thinking for themselves, that their judgments are original, sharp, and informed. But when the sources they rely on start calling you legendary, it becomes painfully obvious how much of their intelligence was borrowed. They weren't evaluating you. They were repeating what they were told, echoing opinions, and leaning on other voices to carry the weight of their decisions. Your recognition didn't just elevate you, it highlighted a fundamental dependency they didn't want anyone to notice. Every laugh, every snide remark, every attempt to dismiss you is really a cover-up for the fact that they never really assessed anything themselves. What makes it devastating for them is that these systems, these sources, weren't influenced by charm, manipulation, or popularity. They were objective, precise, and uncompromising. Their approval doesn't bend for bias or personal preference. So when those same authorities recognized you, it revealed the uncomfortable truth. Their confidence had been borrowed, rehearsed, and shallow. They weren't standing on expertise. They were standing on a borrowed ladder, and you just watched it collapse under them without even touching it. The humor here is almost cruel. They act like they're mocking you, but in reality, they're mocking themselves, because for years they have been measuring others by the wrong scale. They've been defending positions without understanding them, criticizing people without knowing the facts, and feeling smart because someone else's stamp of approval told them they were right. That's the kind of exposure that doesn't look pretty. That's the kind of reality that makes laughter tremble with nervousness. Your rise forces them to confront the fact that authority doesn't equal insight. It forces them to admit that their perceived cleverness was mostly imitation. And that's why their reactions are so messy, so loud, so desperate. You didn't have to dismantle them with words, actions, or proof. You simply allowed the systems that matter to speak, and the truth shone through. Their intelligence wasn't gone, they just never owned it. And now everyone can see it. Number 4. You forced them to confront how often they misread greatness. What you need to understand is that most people are terrified of misjudging others. They like to think they can spot talent, integrity, and potential from a mile away. It's part of how they measure their own intelligence and authority. But when the sources they trust start calling you legendary, it forces a brutal self-examination they aren't equipped to handle. They realize, often in panic, that they've missed greatness before, and not just small slips, but real, undeniable quality. That realization is heavy, unsettling, and it doesn't come quietly. The way they respond to this is telling. Instead of acknowledging the misread, they scramble for explanations, rationalizations, and excuses. They laugh, they deflect, they criticize you, but the criticism is hollow. It's a shield, a desperate attempt to convince themselves and anyone watching that their failure to recognize your value doesn't actually matter. The truth, though, is staring them in the face. They were wrong. And being wrong about someone exceptional is humiliating because it undermines the story they've been telling themselves about their own discernment. What makes this even more devastating for them is the consistency of your recognition. This isn't a single nod from a single source. It's multiple, independent acknowledgements, all pointing in the same direction. There's no room left to argue. You don't need to justify yourself. The validation is already there. And that's the part they struggle with the most. Misreading greatness is one thing. Repeatedly misreading it while watching the world affirm it is another thing entirely. Your rise exposes a pattern they can't easily explain away. It forces them to look at their past decisions and see a trail of missed opportunities, misjudged people, and overlooked talent. That confrontation is uncomfortable, and it shows up as laughter or mockery because it's safer than admitting the truth out loud. Deep down, they know they were wrong, and that's a reality they can't escape. Every smile, every joke, every dismissive comment is an attempt to rewrite history, but it doesn't erase the fact that you were legendary all along, long before they noticed. Number 5, you became proof that credibility can survive sabotage. There's a brutal truth that most people refuse to accept. Influence and credibility aren't fragile. They're resilient, but only when they're earned. They assumed that if enough noise, manipulation, or targeted attacks were directed at you, your reputation would crumble. They believed that smear campaigns, whispers behind closed doors, and carefully orchestrated misinformation could erase what you had built. They didn't account for one critical factor: substance. When what you stand for, the work you've done, and the recognition you've earned exist independently of their control, nothing they try can stick. What makes this so frustrating for them is that your validation came from sources they considered unassailable. These weren't casual observers or fans. They were evaluators, authorities, people trained to see through manipulation and spin. And they saw the truth. You were legitimate, consistent, and undeniable. That's what makes your credibility untouchable. It doesn't require their approval to exist, and it certainly doesn't bend under pressure. Every attempt they made to discredit you only highlights their failure and your resilience. The irony is sharp. They built their sense of power around being gatekeepers of credibility, thinking they could decide who mattered and who didn't. When the same sources they relied on recognized you, the power flipped. Suddenly, the authority they trusted was speaking about you, and they couldn't argue against it without contradicting themselves. Every dismissive comment or forced laugh was a cover for panic, because they realized that credibility, real credibility, cannot be manufactured, stolen, or sabotaged. You didn't just survive their attacks, you exposed their strategy as impotent. Your legitimacy wasn't contingent on anyone's permission, and that truth is hard for them to swallow. Every whisper meant to harm you ended up amplifying your strength. Every lie meant to mislead others ended up revealing their desperation. You became living proof that sabotage only has power over what is weak, and when credibility is built on truth, it doesn't just endure, it thrives, even under fire. Number 6. Their laughter is what people do when authority embarrasses them publicly. There's a reason laughter often comes when someone is cornered, exposed, or humiliated. It's a mask. People instinctively use it to hide the discomfort of being caught off guard, especially when the embarrassment comes from a place they once trusted. In this case, the authorities and sources they relied on, the voices they built their confidence around, turned around and elevated you. That shift wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite. It was undeniable and public, and it left them exposed in the worst way possible. Laughter is easier than admitting, even to themselves, that their judgment was flawed. It's easier than facing the shame of having backed the wrong narrative for so long. The beauty of it is in its irony. They spent so much energy trying to maintain control over perception, carefully curating who mattered, who was credible, who was worthy of recognition. They believed that by choosing which voices to trust, they could dictate reality. And then you showed up. And suddenly, the authority they leaned on was contradicting them. That contradiction is what triggers the laughter. It's not amusement. It's panic trying to sound casual, confusion trying to seem confident, and embarrassment trying to wear a mask. What makes it so striking is how instinctive it is. Even smart, strategic people react this way. When the foundation you've built your identity on cracks, the human brain automatically seeks an outlet, and humor is one of the safest ones. The louder and more forced their laughter, the more it exposes the inner collapse they refuse to acknowledge. They're not laughing at you. They're laughing to survive their own failure in front of others, to convince the world and themselves that their worldview is intact. And yet, the more they laugh, the clearer the truth becomes. They've lost control. Authority no longer shields them from reality. Their credibility isn't protecting them from exposure. Every chuckle, every smirk, every dismissive gesture is a trembling admission that they were wrong, that they misjudged, and that you, standing validated and respected, now highlight their fragility in a way nothing else could. Their laughter is loud, but your truth is louder. Number 7. You triggered a hierarchy malfunction. They thought they had the world neatly arranged, the right people in the right place, the right opinions at the right time, and the right assessments protecting their sense of order. Hierarchies like this are invisible but rigid. People rely on them to feel secure, to measure status, and to justify their choices. You weren't supposed to exist at the level you reached. You weren't supposed to be recognized, acknowledged, or celebrated by the same sources they trusted to maintain the order. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The moment those voices elevated you, it didn't just shift perception. It broke the invisible ladder they had been climbing, step by step, believing it was safe, predictable, and unchallenged. The malfunction is more than embarrassment. It's a psychological collapse. When someone enters a hierarchy where they weren't expected, or where they exceed the limits imposed by others, it creates tension, confusion, and desperation. People start questioning themselves, the system, and even the reality around them. They've relied on that structure to navigate influence, trust, and authority, and suddenly the rules no longer apply in the way they expected. They can't ignore you because the sources that mattered recognized you. They can't demote you in their minds without contradicting the very structure they depend on. This is why their reactions are so erratic. You didn't have to confront them directly. You didn't have to argue or prove anything. Your presence and recognition alone triggered an upheaval. It's like a machine that was fine until one small gear moved differently, causing the entire system to grind, shake, and falter. Every laugh, every attempt at dismissal, every subtle mockery is a desperate attempt to stabilize something that can no longer be stabilized. And the irony is brutal. They built their hierarchy to control perception, to manage influence, to predict outcomes. You didn't try to dismantle it. You simply rose to a level they never anticipated. And in doing so, you exposed not just your own legitimacy, but the fragility of their carefully constructed world. That hierarchy isn't just malfunctioning, it's screaming that reality doesn't bend to anyone's expectation, and they are left scrambling to respond, pretending they are still in charge. Number 8, you force them to witness influence they don't possess. There's a subtle cruelty in seeing someone command influence that you can't touch, no matter how hard you try. They thought influence was about proximity, connections, or loud voices. They believed that being in the right circles or quoting the right authorities meant you controlled perception, power, and respect. Then you came along, and everything shifted. Without pandering, without lobbying, without begging for validation, you earned recognition from sources that actually matter. Suddenly, their perception of control became irrelevant. You had influence they could see but could never replicate, and the sight of it is corrosive. What makes this so destabilizing is how obvious it is. They can't argue that the recognition is fake. They can't dismiss the sources as insignificant, because these are the same voices they have leaned on for guidance, authority, and judgment for years. And when these sources validate you, it doesn't just elevate you, it highlights their impotence. They realize that influence isn't something they can manufacture, manipulate, or borrow. It is earned, consistent, and visible to anyone paying attention. Watching you wield that kind of organic influence without effort exposes their dependency, their shortcuts, and their illusions of power. The reaction is predictable. They laugh, they mock, they try to trivialize the outcome. But the laughter is hollow. It's defensive. It's the sound of people who know they are watching a truth they can never own, trying to convince themselves it doesn't matter. Deep down, they feel a pang of envy, frustration, and helplessness because they understand the unspoken rule. Influence that is real doesn't come from manipulation or repetition. It comes from substance, credibility, and consistency. You have it, they don't. And that reality burns quietly but persistently. Every smile, every joke, every dismissive comment is a reaction to their inability to achieve what you already command effortlessly. You didn't just gain influence, they are forced to watch it happen in real time, powerless to intervene, powerless to replicate, and desperate to act like it doesn't faze them. Your presence alone is a mirror, and it reflects everything they lack in a way that's impossible to ignore. Number 9, their ridicule is a reaction to lost narrative control. Control over the story has always been their comfort zone. They built their identity around managing perception, shaping opinions, and deciding who mattered and who didn't. Every conversation, every whisper, every piece of validation they highlighted was carefully curated to reinforce their version of reality. Then you disrupted it. You didn't just exist. You became the focal point of the narrative they thought they owned. The sources they trusted began telling a story that no longer aligned with the one they had been repeating to feel secure. That shift is seismic, and their reaction is instinctive. Ridicule. Ridicule is the easiest weapon when authority no longer defends you. It's cheap, immediate, and performative. Laughing, mocking, or dismissing you is safer than admitting that the control they clung to is gone. Deep down, they know the story has moved beyond them. Every word of derision is really a desperate attempt to rewrite events after the fact, to pretend they still hold sway over perception. But the truth is stubborn. Recognition, respect, and influence do not bend to opinion. When those sources spoke in your favor, it wasn't negotiable, and it wasn't conditional. What makes it even more brutal is that this narrative loss is public and layered. They can't quietly retract their previous judgments without exposing the gap between their past certainty and present confusion. They can't openly acknowledge the shift without admitting they misread you. So they perform laughter, ridicule, and sarcasm, anything to mask the dissonance between the story they want and the story that exists. And yet, the irony is undeniable. By trying to mock you, they are constantly drawing attention back to your legitimacy. Every sneer, every dismissive comment, every forced chuckle serves as proof that the narrative is no longer theirs. They are now spectators to your recognition, unable to influence it, unable to contain it, and desperately trying to convince themselves that control is intact. Your presence exposed that narrative was never really under their command, and that loss is far more humiliating than any confrontation could ever be. Number 10. You revealed the difference between proximity and relevance. They've always believed that being close to power or influence meant having influence themselves. They thought access was the same as authority, that name-dropping and networking could substitute for substance. For years, they measured success by how many doors they could open, how many people they could impress, and how well they could align themselves with the right voices. That was their security, their illusion of control. Then you showed up, and everything they assumed about proximity being power collapsed. Recognition came to you not because of who you knew, but because of what you carried, your credibility, your consistency, your undeniable value. The brilliance of this moment is in its simplicity. You didn't chase validation or beg for permission. You didn't try to manipulate networks or bend systems to your favor. You existed with substance, and the sources that truly mattered noticed. That distinction is devastating for people who have spent their lives equating access with authority. Suddenly, they realize that proximity doesn't equal relevance. You can be miles away from the inner circles they cling to and still command recognition that they will never earn. This realization is corrosive to their ego. It forces them to confront the truth they've avoided for years. Influence isn't about appearances, connections, or borrowed authority. It's about impact. It's about resonance. It's about being undeniable in a way that transcends social hierarchy. And seeing you achieve that without their methods exposes their strategy as hollow. Every attempt to mock or diminish you only highlights their inability to replicate what you've naturally earned. Your rise makes it painfully clear that relevance is not granted, it is earned. And by achieving it independently of their circles, you've not only elevated yourself, but exposed the shallow calculations they've relied on to feel powerful. Their laughter, their mockery, their dismissive gestures are not signs of victory. They are the sound of people trying to convince themselves that influence can still be bought or borrowed, even while your substance has already outstripped it. You didn't just succeed, you revealed the illusion they've been living under. Number 11. Their trusted voices didn't just praise you, they corrected them. There's a subtle but brutal truth in being recognized by the sources they rely on. It's not just validation, it's a correction. For years, they operated under the assumption that the authorities they leaned on were aligned with their judgments, their opinions, and their narrative. They believed that trust in those voices meant immunity from contradiction, that following their guidance guaranteed accuracy. Then you appeared, and those same voices didn't just praise you. They implicitly said, "You were wrong." Every nod, every acknowledgement, every affirmation you received carried a silent but undeniable message. The judgment they thought was infallible wasn't. That realization is disorienting. It forces them to reckon with the fact that their confidence, their sense of authority, and their ability to evaluate were borrowed and flawed. The sources they trusted, the voices that had long guided their decisions, had quietly corrected their misreading of reality. And it wasn't a personal attack. It was simply truth, delivered in the form of recognition for you. That distinction makes the embarrassment sharper because it's objective. There's no spin, no opinion, no room for debate. They were corrected without ever being addressed directly. The psychological impact is intense. They can laugh, mock, or belittle you all they want. But every public acknowledgement of your legitimacy serves as a mirror. It reflects not only your credibility, but their miscalculation. Every validation from those sources amplifies the mistake they've been living with, a mistake they can neither hide nor reverse. Their laughter is defensive, their ridicule performative, because admitting they were corrected would strip away the facade of infallibility they've relied on for years. By being recognized, you didn't just rise. You reshaped the very map of their judgment. You became the standard they failed to see, the proof that reliance on authority can backfire, and the living evidence that the world doesn't bend to their assumptions. The sources they trusted didn't just elevate you. They corrected them, and that correction is a wound they can't dress, a truth they can't argue, and a reality they will never fully control. Number 12. You made it obvious that credibility has a memory. Credibility isn't fleeting, and that's the part they can't stomach. Most people operate under the illusion that perception is flexible, that narratives can be rewritten overnight, and that past recognition can be ignored or erased. You shattered that idea. The sources that mattered didn't just notice you once, they remembered. They tracked your consistency, your actions, your impact, and your results over time. That accumulation of proof doesn't vanish because someone tries to rewrite the story. Credibility has a memory, and yours was unforgettable. What's so devastating for them is that this memory doesn't rely on emotion or opinion. It relies on evidence, track records, and observable truth. They can mock you all they want, but every acknowledgement you receive is built on years of consistency, not charm or manipulation. That makes their reaction awkward and frantic. They wanted to control the narrative, to decide who mattered and who didn't, but memory doesn't negotiate. Every validation of your work serves as a time-stamped reminder that they misjudged you, and that misjudgment isn't something that can simply be laughed off. The irony is sharp. They've spent so much energy trying to shape perception in the moment, chasing approval, spinning stories, and controlling conversations. Meanwhile, your credibility quietly accumulated value, proof that cannot be taken back or rewritten. Every source that recognized you, every nod that came your way, was a confirmation of something they cannot undo. It exposes the fragility of their temporary authority and highlights the permanence of genuine recognition. Your memory of credibility stands in stark contrast to their improvisation, their short-term influence, and their borrowed authority. You didn't just earn recognition. You created a record, a trail of undeniable substance that keeps resurfacing to correct their assumptions. That is why they laugh, why they ridicule, and why their attempts to dismiss you feel forced. It's not amusement. They're witnessing the persistence of truth, and it is relentless, unyielding, and impossible for them to rewrite. Your credibility remembers. Their perception does not. Number 13. You turned their certainty into a punchline without trying to. There's a quiet but brutal satisfaction in seeing people's confidence implode, not because you attacked it, but simply because you existed. They built their certainty carefully over the years, surrounding themselves with trusted voices, familiar narratives, and a framework that made them feel in control. They believed that by leaning on authority, repetition, and echo chambers, they could predict, evaluate, and decide who mattered and who didn't. Then you appeared, and suddenly their entire sense of being right became laughable. You didn't have to argue, explain, or prove anything. Their certainty unraveled under its own weight, and you became the punchline to the story they never saw coming. What makes this moment so intense is the simplicity of it. They had no clue that their reliance on borrowed judgment was a vulnerability. They thought consensus equaled truth. They thought alignment with authority guaranteed correctness. But when those same authorities recognized you, it became obvious that their framework was flawed from the start. Every assumption they made about you, every preemptive dismissal, every confident declaration about your insignificance was exposed as misplaced, premature, and ultimately ridiculous. That's why their reactions are performative. They're trying to pretend the situation isn't humiliating, even as it completely undermines the foundation of their confidence. There's also a layer of irony in the situation. They spent years cultivating control over perception, positioning themselves as arbiters of judgment, and protecting their own ego by assuming superiority over others. Yet you didn't even need to engage with them directly. Your legitimacy, your consistency, and your recognition by credible sources flipped the narrative entirely. Their certainty didn't just falter, it became comedic in the most uncomfortable way, a spectacle of self-delusion exposed without confrontation. And here's the reality they can't escape. The punchline isn't about you, it's about them. You simply revealed what happens when borrowed certainty meets undeniable truth. Their laughter, their mockery, their dismissive gestures are just an instinctive response to embarrassment, a flimsy cover for the humiliation of watching themselves proven wrong without ever realizing it. You didn't have to try. You just existed, and in doing so, you rewrote the script on who holds the power of truth. Number 14. Their laughter is the sound of influence leaving the room. There's a quiet terror in realizing that what you once controlled is no longer yours. That's exactly what their laughter represents. They built their lives around the illusion of influence, carefully curating relationships, opinions, and recognition to feel powerful. They believed that by controlling the narrative, aligning with authority, and leaning on the right voices, they could dictate perception and maintain supremacy in their circles. Then you arrived, and suddenly their influence didn't matter. Every chuckle, every mockery, every forced joke is an attempt to mask the truth. Influence has quietly migrated away from them, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. What's striking is how invisible the shift is to everyone except them. They feel it like a weight pressing down, a subtle displacement of authority they can't articulate. It's humiliating because they built their identity on the belief that they were gatekeepers, people who decided who mattered, who was credible, and who could rise. But influence doesn't respect permission, and recognition doesn't ask for consent. Your legitimacy, your impact, your acknowledgement by credible sources, all of it happened without their approval, without their intervention, and without their control. That makes them laugh, but it's a hollow, defensive sound. They're not amused, they're panicking, pretending the world hasn't shifted, even as they watch their own relevance slip quietly out of reach. The irony is ruthless. Every dismissive comment they make, every sarcastic gesture, every attempt at ridicule reinforces the truth they're trying to hide. The room isn't theirs anymore. They can still speak, still perform authority, but real influence has already left. And that's why this moment is so powerful. You didn't take it. You never had to. Your recognition, your consistency, and your substance naturally drew it, leaving them stranded in the echo of their own laughter, desperate to convince themselves they still belong in a space where they no longer hold weight. In the end, their laughter is not victory. It's the sound of reality refusing to obey their control, the audible proof that influence can't be borrowed, imposed, or stolen. It can only be earned, and you, standing validated and undeniable, are the one they cannot touch. Conclusion. What we've uncovered here is far more than a story of recognition or validation. It's a revelation of power, influence, and the invisible dynamics that govern perception. Every reaction, every laugh, every attempt at mockery from those who once thought they were in control reveals a simple, undeniable truth. Legitimacy cannot be borrowed, authority cannot be faked, and influence cannot be forced. You didn't need to argue, prove yourself, or fight for acknowledgement. The recognition you earned from credible, independent sources exposed the fragility of their assumptions, the limits of their control, and the hollow nature of confidence built on borrowed judgment. They laughed because reality betrayed them. They mocked because admitting the truth would shatter the identity they carefully curated over years. They reacted defensively because they were confronted with a reality they could neither manipulate nor escape. And through all of it, you stood above it. Your credibility, consistency, and substance created an undeniable truth that no ridicule, no narrative control, and no temporary authority could touch. You didn't just rise, you exposed patterns, revealed illusions, and proved that true influence is earned, remembered, and independent of opinion. This isn't about revenge or one-upmanship or petty victory. It's about the clarity of truth, the resilience of substance, and the way real recognition illuminates everything around it. Every action you've taken, every acknowledgement you've received, and every reaction you've witnessed has reinforced a single point. When legitimacy aligns with consistency and credibility, it stands unshakable. Even when the world, the authorities, and the people who once doubted you are scrambling to pretend nothing has changed. So hold this moment close. Understand how power works, how perception bends, and how influence truly shifts. Use it not to destroy, but to grow, to stand firm, and to let truth speak louder than mockery ever could. Your story is validation enough. Your consistency is undeniable, and your influence is permanent. If this breakdown opened your eyes and gave you a new perspective, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights, like this video to show support, comment your thoughts below to join the conversation, and share it with anyone who needs to see the truth about influence, credibility, and recognition. Every action helps us bring more clarity to the people who are ready to understand the real dynamics behind power, perception, and success. God bless you.